She was a janitor at the base camp when a SEAL handed her his rifle, and she made the impossible shot. Nobody saw her. Nobody cared who she was. Until one moment changed everything. In the middle of a brutal assault, when the elite were cornered and hope was fading, the last person anyone expected picked up the weapon. Steady hands, haunted eyes, and a past no one knew. But this wasn't luck. This was something deeper, something buried. And when the dust settled, it wasn't just the enemy that was exposed. Who is she really? And why is the man in charge so desperate to keep her in the shadows? Every story brings us a little closer together. Before we dive in, drop a comment with where you're tuning in from. It's a joy to see how far this family of listeners reaches. The early morning sun cast long shadows across forward operating base Sentinel as Brenna Mitchell pushed her cleaning cart down the dusty corridor. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, and her green eyes stayed focused on the floor ahead of her. At 28 years old, she had mastered the art of becoming invisible. A group of Navy SEALs strode past, their boots thundering against the concrete. They didn't even glance her way as she pressed herself against the wall to let them pass. One of them bumped her cart, sending cleaning supplies rattling, but kept walking without acknowledgement. Brenna straightened the bottles with practiced patience, used to being treated like part of the furniture. "Just another day in paradise," she muttered under her breath, continuing her rounds. 3 years ago, she would have been walking these halls in combat boots and fatigues, an M4 rifle slung across her chest. Now she wore a gray custodial uniform with a plastic name tag that read, Mitchell B. The change still stung, but she had learned to swallow her pride. As she mopped the floor of the Tactical Operations Center, her shoulder twinged, a constant reminder of why she was here. Her mind drifted back to that day on the training range, the day everything changed. She had been one of the Army's top marksmen with accuracy scores that turned heads. Her spotter, James, had been more than just her partner. He'd been her mentor, the one person who truly saw her potential. The memory made her grip the mop handle tighter. What was supposed to be a routine training exercise had turned into a nightmare. The explosion came out of nowhere. Through the scope of her rifle, she had watched helplessly as James was thrown through the air. Her instincts kicked in and she'd rushed to help him, but the second blast caught her directly. The impact had torn through her right shoulder, leaving behind permanent damage and ending her promising military career. Brenna paused her mopping, rolling her shoulder to ease the familiar ache. The military doctors had done their best, but they couldn't restore the stability she needed for precision shooting. The psychological scars ran deeper than the physical ones. The loss of James, the end of her dreams, the lingering questions about what really happened that day. A commotion drew her attention as another SEAL team entered the operations center. She kept her head down, continuing to mop in slow, methodical strokes. These men were the elite of the elite, the ones she had once dreamed of working alongside. Now they walked past her like she was just another shadow on the wall. "Hey, Janitor," one of them called out. "We need this area cleared for a briefing." Brenna nodded silently, gathering her supplies. She could feel their impatient stares as she wheeled her cart toward the door. 3 years ago, she would have been sitting at that briefing table, contributing to mission planning with her expertise in long-range target acquisition. Now she was being shooed away like an unwanted distraction, but that was exactly why she had taken this job. When the Military Medical Board had officially discharged her, she could have found civilian work anywhere. Instead, she had deliberately sought out this position at Forward Operating Base Sentinel. Being here, even as a janitor, kept her connected to the world she had lost. It let her stay close to the action, even if she could only observe from the margins. Later that afternoon, as she cleaned the base's shooting range, Brenna allowed herself a moment of indulgence. She stood at the firing line, her hands instinctively finding the familiar stance. In her mind, she could feel the weight of her old rifle, see the target through the scope, hear James's steady voice calling out wind conditions. "Range is hot!" a voice barked, startling her from her reverie. She quickly stepped back as a group of soldiers filed in for practice. None of them noticed how naturally she had assumed the shooter's stance, or how her eyes automatically calculated the wind indicators. They saw only what they expected to see, a janitor with a mop and bucket. Brenna gathered her cleaning supplies and slipped away, letting the sound of gunfire fade behind her. Her shoulder ached, but she ignored it. The pain was a small price to pay for staying close to this world, even if she could no longer be part of it. She knew that someday she would uncover the truth about what really happened on that training range. Until then, she would keep watching, keep waiting, and keep mopping these floors. As she pushed her cart back toward the supply closet, another SEAL team passed by, deep in tactical discussion. One of them actually looked at her this time, only to ask her to clean up a coffee spill in their briefing room. Brenna nodded quietly, accepting the task without complaint. Let them see only the janitor with the mop. Let them overlook the former marksman who could have matched any of their shooting scores. For now, being invisible was exactly what she needed to be. Lieutenant Commander Kane Harrison stood in the Tactical Operations Center, his attention drawn to the janitor quietly working in the corner. Unlike his fellow SEALs, he noticed how she moved with the precise efficiency of someone with military training. Her movements were too deliberate, too aware of her surroundings to be those of a typical civilian contractor. "Ma'am," he acknowledged as she passed near him. The simple courtesy earned him surprised looks from both the janitor and his team members. Brenna paused, caught off guard by the rare recognition. "Sir," she responded quietly, her green eyes meeting his blue ones for a brief moment before returning to her task. "Anderson, watch your coffee cup. Let's not make extra work for people," Kane said firmly, as one of his junior officers carelessly balanced a full mug on the edge of a desk. The young SEAL quickly repositioned his drink, looking slightly embarrassed. Throughout the morning briefing, Kane noticed how the janitor, Mitchell according to her name tag, worked systematically around the room's edges. She maintained a professional distance from the operational discussions but moved with an awareness that spoke of tactical training. His instincts, honed through years of SEAL operations, told him there was more to her story. The briefing room's door opened and Colonel Marcus Thorne strode in. The atmosphere immediately shifted as personnel snapped to attention. Brenna kept her head down, but Kane noticed how her shoulders tensed at Thorne's arrival. "At ease," Thorne commanded, his cold eyes sweeping the room. "Mitchell, we need this area cleared now. Classified briefing." "Yes, sir," Brenna responded, gathering her supplies with efficient speed. As she reached for her cart, a folder slipped from Thorne's grasp, scattering papers across her freshly mopped floor. "Clean that up," Thorne ordered without looking at her, already turning to address the assembled SEAL team. Kane watched as Brenna collected the papers, noting how she automatically arranged them in proper military order before handing them back. Thorne snatched them without acknowledgement, but Kane caught the flash of frustrated recognition in her eyes. She had clearly handled classified documents before. Later that afternoon, Kane found himself in the base's administrative office reviewing personnel files. His curiosity about Mitchell had led him to make some discreet inquiries. The clerk's response was telling. "Oh, Mitchell? She's filed transfer requests every 3 months like clockwork." "All denied by Colonel Thorne himself," the clerk shared, pulling up the records. "Says she's too valuable in her current position. Weird thing to say about a janitor, if you ask me." Kane's interest deepened. The pattern suggested something more than routine personnel management. He observed Mitchell throughout the day, noting how she maintained clear sightlines to exits, automatically checked corners, and positioned herself to observe without being noticed. All hallmarks of tactical training. During the evening shift change, Kane approached her as she restocked her cleaning cart. "Mitchell," he said quietly, "you were Army, weren't you?" Brenna stiffened slightly but maintained her professional demeanor. "Yes, sir. A lifetime ago." "Marksman, from your stance when you're watching the range," he continued, keeping his voice casual. This time she did look up, surprise briefly breaking through her carefully maintained facade. "That was before," she said simply, but her hand unconsciously moved to her right shoulder. Their conversation was interrupted by Colonel Thorne's voice echoing down the corridor. "Mitchell, the conference room needs attention before tomorrow's command briefing." "Now," he added sharply when she didn't immediately respond. Kane watched the interaction closely. Thorne's tone carried more than simple authority. There was an edge of something else, something that made his combat-honed instincts prickle with warning. "Sir," Brenna acknowledged, her voice carefully neutral as she pushed her cart toward the conference room. "Lieutenant Commander," Thorne addressed Kane with forced cordiality. "Your team's presence is required at 0700 hours tomorrow. We have some matters to discuss regarding upcoming operations." "Understood, sir," Kane replied, matching Thorne's formal tone. He noticed how the colonel's eyes followed Mitchell down the corridor, his expression calculating rather than dismissive. As regular base operations continued around them, Kane sensed the undercurrents of tension beneath the surface. Mitchell moved through her duties with quiet efficiency, but he could see the frustration in her careful movements, the way she contained herself within the role she was forced to play. The base settled into its evening routine: security patrols, shift changes, the constant hum of military machinery. But Kane's mind kept returning to the puzzle of Brenna Mitchell, the janitor who moved like a warrior, and Colonel Thorne's unusual interest in keeping her exactly where she was. The afternoon sun beat down on forward operating base Sentinel as the supply convoy approached the main gate. Brenna Mitchell watched from her position near the command center, mop in hand, as the line of dusty vehicles waited for security clearance. Everything seemed normal. The usual guards, the standard procedures, the familiar rhythm of base operations. Then everything changed in an instant. The first explosion rocked the guard tower nearest to the gate, sending concrete and metal fragments raining down. Before anyone could react, a second blast took out the adjacent tower. The precise timing and placement of the explosions spoke of careful planning. "Contact, multiple hostiles." The warning crackled over the base-wide communications system, followed by the sharp staccato of automatic weapons fire. Brenna dropped her mop, instinctively moving away from the windows as years of training kicked in. Through the reinforced glass, she watched Taliban fighters emerge from the last supply truck, their weapons already blazing. More insurgents appeared from hidden positions around the base perimeter, their coordinated movements suggesting this was no random attack. The base alarm system wailed to life, its piercing tone mixing with shouts and gunfire. Soldiers rushed to defensive positions, many still pulling on tactical gear as they ran. The organized chaos of a base under attack unfolded around her. Lieutenant Commander Kane Harrison burst out of the Tactical Operations Center, already issuing orders through his radio. "Alpha Team, secure the North Sector. Bravo, I want eyes on that convoy. Someone tell me how they got through our checkpoints." Colonel Thorne's voice boomed through the corridor. "All non-combat personnel to secure locations immediately. This is not a drill." Brenna hesitated, torn between following evacuation protocols and knowing she could do more. Through the windows, she could see the Taliban fighters advancing methodically, using the disabled guard towers as cover. Their tactics were sophisticated, nothing like the usual insurgent attacks. The sound of breaking glass echoed from nearby, followed by the distinctive thump of grenades landing on tile floor. "Breach in the west wing," someone shouted. The fighting was already inside the base. Kane spotted Brenna still standing in the corridor. "Mitchell, get to shelter," he ordered, but his attention was immediately drawn to new reports coming through his radio. "Sir, they're targeting our communications array," a young sergeant called out. "We're losing contact with outer sectors." The base's defensive response was hampered by the initial confusion. Soldiers who had been eating lunch or maintaining equipment scrambled to their posts, but the attackers had chosen their moment well. The shift change was approaching, leaving many positions understaffed. Through the command center windows, Brenna watched as more Taliban fighters emerged from hidden positions. They moved with military precision, using smoke grenades to cover their advance. This was no random group of insurgents. These were well-trained fighters executing a carefully planned assault. "Multiple breaches confirmed," a voice reported over the increasingly static-filled radio network. "They're inside the perimeter on 3 sides." The methodical nature of the attack became clear as key defensive positions fell one by one. The insurgents had detailed knowledge of the base layout, targeting critical infrastructure with surgical precision. Communications, power systems, and security measures were being systematically neutralized. Colonel Thorne strode through the chaos, barking orders. "Get those backup generators online. I want every available fighter at their designated defensive positions." He passed Brenna without acknowledgement, but she noticed how his eyes lingered on the tactical situation displays. The base's defensive perimeter continued to crumble. Each explosion and burst of gunfire brought the threat closer to the command center. The Taliban fighters moved like they had rehearsed this assault countless times, using the base's own defensive features against it. Kane organized his SEAL team with rapid efficiency, positioning them to protect critical areas. "Watch those blind spots," he commanded. "They know exactly where they're going." The afternoon sun that had been so bright moments ago was now obscured by smoke from multiple fires. The acrid smell of burning equipment and explosives filled the air. Through the haze, more fighters appeared, their weapons trained on the command center. "They're targeting command and control," someone shouted as another explosion rocked the building. The Tactical Operations Center, usually a hub of controlled activity, had devolved into a scene of frantic preparation for close-quarter combat. Brenna found herself pressed against a wall as soldiers rushed past, heading to defensive positions. Her right shoulder ached with phantom pain as muscle memory from her army days surged through her body. She knew exactly what needed to be done, how to respond, but her janitorial uniform marked her as a civilian to be protected rather than a soldier who could fight. The attack had transformed the familiar base into a battlefield in minutes. The methodical elimination of defenses, the precise targeting of crucial systems, and the coordinated movements of the attackers all pointed to one disturbing conclusion. This was no ordinary Taliban assault. They had help, detailed intelligence, and a specific objective. As Brenna watched Kane directing his men with calm efficiency, another explosion lit up the afternoon sky. The base's main communications array toppled, sending sparks and debris raining down. With its fall, forward operating base Sentinel's ability to call for immediate reinforcements vanished. The base was effectively cut off, its defenses compromised, and the enemy was inside the wire. And they were still advancing. The motor pool erupted in chaos as Kane's sniper team scrambled for cover. Bullets pinged off vehicles and concrete barriers, forcing them to duck behind whatever protection they could find. Through the smoke and dust, Kane directed his men with hand signals, trying to establish a defensive position among the maintenance bays and parked vehicles. "Contact north side," one of his men shouted as more Taliban fighters appeared, using the disabled guard towers for cover. Kane pressed himself against a Humvee, his custom Barrett M82 sniper rifle at the ready. The weapon was a masterpiece of precision engineering, modified specifically for his requirements over years of service. He'd made impossible shots with it before, but the current situation was deteriorating rapidly. "Sir, they've got us boxed in," his spotter called out, returning fire with his sidearm. The enemy had them pinned down with well-coordinated crossfire, making any movement deadly. Kane spotted movement in his peripheral vision, a figure darting between vehicles. His trigger finger tensed before he recognized Brenna Mitchell's distinctive movement pattern. Even in civilian clothes, she moved like the soldier she used to be, staying low and using proper cover techniques. Before he could signal her to get to safety, the distinctive whoosh of a rocket-propelled grenade split the air. Kane had a fraction of a second to react as the RPG streaked toward their position. "Incoming!" he shouted. But it was too late. The explosion threw him backward, slamming him against a tool chest. White-hot pain tore through his right arm as shrapnel ripped into flesh and muscle. The world spun, sounds becoming muffled and distant. When his vision cleared, he saw his dominant arm hanging useless at his side, blood soaking through his sleeve. "Commander's hit," someone yelled. The situation had gone from bad to critical in seconds. Kane tried to lift his rifle, but his right arm wouldn't respond. The Barrett, deadly accurate in his hands under normal circumstances, was now just dead weight. He could hear more Taliban fighters approaching, their voices carrying over the gunfire and explosions. Through the haze of pain, he spotted Brenna again. She was crouched behind a maintenance truck 30 feet away, her eyes alert and analyzing the situation. In that moment, Kane saw past the janitorial uniform to the soldier underneath. He remembered the bits of her background he'd pieced together. Former Army marksman, distinguished service record, career cut short by what was listed as a training accident. The decision crystallized in his mind with perfect clarity. They needed a sniper, and his injury had just taken him out of the equation. But there was another skilled marksman within reach, even if everyone else had forgotten it. Kane looked at his rifle, then at Brenna. It was an impossible choice, but they were out of options. The Barrett was more than just a weapon. It was an extension of himself, customized over countless missions. But right now, it was useless in his hands. Using his good arm, Kane pulled the rifle close. "Mitchell!" he called out, just loud enough to catch her attention without drawing enemy fire. Brenna's head snapped toward him, her green eyes widening as she saw his injury. Recognition flickered across her face as she spotted the Barrett in his hand. 800 meters northeast tower, Kane said, his voice steady despite the pain. With a smooth motion, he slid the rifle across the concrete toward her. One shot. The Barrett came to rest at Brenna's feet. She stared at it, frozen. Kane could see the internal battle playing out across her features. Years of training versus months of self-doubt. Muscle memory versus psychological barriers. The rifle was different from what she'd used in the Army. The Barrett M82 was a massive weapon, known for its tremendous recoil. Even experienced snipers needed time to familiarize themselves with its particular characteristics. Brenna would have to make a shot at 800 meters with an unfamiliar rifle, under enemy fire, with no time to adjust or practice. Her right hand twitched toward the rifle, then pulled back. Kane could see her left shoulder hunch slightly, the one that had been injured in the accident that ended her military career. Fear, doubt, and old trauma warred with training and necessity on her face. Another explosion rocked the motor pool closer this time. They were running out of time. The fate of the base might well rest on whether this former Army marksman could overcome her past and make one crucial shot. "Mitchell," Kane called out again, locking eyes with her. "You can do this." Brenna's hands hovered over the Barrett, her breathing shallow and quick. The weight of the moment pressed down on her. Not just the impossible shot requirements, but the trust being placed in her by a SEAL commander who barely knew her. After months of being invisible, of doubting herself, of being dismissed by everyone around her, someone was finally seeing her true capabilities. The rifle waited on the concrete between them, representing both challenge and redemption. In the distance, more gunfire erupted, punctuated by the sharp crack of sniper rounds from the Taliban positions. The northeast tower loomed 800 meters away, holding what Kane must have identified as a crucial target. One shot, 800 meters, an unfamiliar weapon, impossible odds. Brenna's hands reached for the Barrett. Brenna's hands wrapped around the Barrett M82, and immediately she noticed the difference. Her old M24 had been like a precision instrument, lighter, more delicate. This beast of a rifle felt like a small cannon in comparison. The weight alone was startling, 29 pounds compared to her old rifle's 11. She ran her fingers along the familiar elements, safety, trigger, magazine, while noting the differences in their placement and feel. Time seemed to slow as her training kicked in. The stock pressed against her shoulder, and she pushed away the nagging doubt about her old injury. Through the scope, she could see the northeast tower clearly. A Taliban gunner had set up a heavy machine gun there, using the elevation to rain down fire on the base defenders. 800 meters. The distance made her breath catch. She'd made shots at that range before, but not with an unfamiliar rifle, not under fire, and not with everyone's lives depending on it. "Winds from the northwest 8 miles per hour, Kane called out, his voice steady despite his injury. Temperature 82 degrees Fahrenheit. Brenna's mind automatically started the calculations. The Barrett fired .50 caliber rounds, different from her old 7.62 millimeter cartridges. Higher velocity meant less wind drift, but she'd need to adjust for the different ballistics. The elevation change to the tower was roughly 40 meters up. She factored in temperature, air density, and the Coriolis effect from the Earth's rotation. She could feel eyes on her. The SEALs who had walked past her 100 times without a glance were now watching intently as the base janitor set up for a shot that would make even experienced snipers hesitate. Someone nearby whispered, "Is Mitchell really going to try this?" Through the scope, she tracked the gunner's movement pattern. He was smart, ducking between shots, only exposing himself for seconds at a time through a narrow window opening. The window itself was barely 2 feet wide, a tiny target at 800 meters. Brenna took a deep breath, then another. Her heart rate slowed. The world narrowed down to the scope, the wind, and the target. Just like training. Just like before the accident. "He's moving left to right," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. 3-second exposure intervals. Next appearance in 5, 4, 3. The gunner appeared exactly where she predicted. Brenna's fingers squeezed the trigger with careful pressure. The Barrett roared, its massive recoil slamming into her shoulder. She rode through the pain, keeping her eye on target. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then the Taliban gunner jerked backward, the heavy machine gun falling silent. Through her scope, Brenna could see the perfect shot placement, center mass, exactly where she'd aimed. The motor pool fell silent except for the distant sounds of battle. Brenna kept the rifle trained on the window, watching for any movement, following her training to ensure the threat was truly neutralized. "Holy shit," someone whispered behind her. "Dead center at 800 meters, with an unfamiliar rifle." "Target down," Brenna reported formally, finally lowering the Barrett. Her hands were steady, but her heart was racing. She'd done it. After all this time, after all the doubt and pain, she'd proven she still had the skills that had once made her one of the Army's top marksmen. Kane was grinning despite his injury. "Textbook shot, Mitchell. Remind me again why you're pushing a broom instead of carrying a rifle?" Before she could answer, more voices called out from around the motor pool. The SEALs, who had previously ignored her existence, were now staring with newfound respect. She heard snippets of their conversations. "Did you see that shot? The janitor's a sniper? That's some serious skill right there." Colonel Thorne's voice crackled over the radio. "Who made that shot from the motor pool?" Kane picked up his radio with his good hand. "Mitchell, sir. Brenna Mitchell." There was a long pause before Thorne responded. "The contractor? The janitor?" "The former Army marksman who's been requesting reinstatement, sir," Kane corrected, giving Brenna a meaningful look. "And I'd say she just demonstrated exactly why we should be reconsidering those transfer requests." Brenna felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the Afghan heat. For months, she'd been invisible, doubting herself, wondering if she'd ever find her way back to who she used to be. Now, with one impossible shot, she'd reminded everyone, including herself, of exactly what she was capable of. The sound of approaching helicopters filled the air as reinforcements arrived to help secure the base. The tide of battle had turned, and it had started with her shot. The Taliban fighters, having lost their high ground advantage, were already beginning to retreat. Brenna carefully checked the Barrett for damage, her movements precise and professional. She could feel the shift in how the others watched her now. No longer the invisible janitor, but a proven warrior who had just saved lives with an extraordinary display of skill. Colonel Marcus Thorne strode into the motor pool like a gathering storm. His polished boots clicked against the concrete as he approached, his face set in rigid lines that gave nothing away. The firefight had ended 15 minutes ago, but tension still crackled in the air like static before lightning. "Lieutenant Commander Harrison," Thorne said, his voice carefully neutral. "Report." Kane, his arm now roughly bandaged, straightened despite his injury. "Sir, during the attack, my team was pinned down here. I took shrapnel from an RPG and couldn't operate my rifle. Ms. Mitchell demonstrated exceptional marksmanship by eliminating a Taliban gunner at 800 meters with my Barrett M82. Thorne's gaze shifted to Brenna, who still held the massive rifle. His eyes narrowed slightly, studying her with an intensity that seemed oddly focused for someone who had dismissed her countless times before. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, emphasizing her civilian status, "I was under the impression you were medically discharged. Shoulder injury, wasn't it?" Brenna felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. Something in his tone, in the precise way he referenced her injury, set off warning bells in her mind. "Yes, sir," she replied carefully, "but my marksmanship training didn't disappear with my discharge." "Evidently not." Thorne circled her slowly like a predator sizing up potential prey. 800 meters is quite impressive, especially with an unfamiliar weapon. Your previous service record indicated you typically used an M24-inch. Brenna's spine stiffened. In all her attempts to transfer back to active duty, Thorne had never once mentioned knowing details of her service record. He'd always treated her transfer requests as amusing annoyances barely worth his time. "The principles remain the same, sir," she said. "Adjust for wind, elevation, ballistics. The Barrett's actually more forgiving at that range than my old rifle." Kane shifted closer, his good hand resting casually near his sidearm. "Colonel, Mitchell's shot saved lives today. Without her, we'd still be pinned down, and casualties would be significantly higher." "Indeed." Thorne's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Tell me, Miss Mitchell, do you often practice with high-caliber rifles? Maintain those skills of yours?" "No, sir. Base regulations prohibit civilian contractors from accessing the firing range." "And yet you made that shot." Thorne's voice hardened. "First try under pressure with no recent practice. Rather remarkable, wouldn't you say?" Kane stepped forward, placing himself partially between Brenna and Thorne. "Sir, with respect, are you suggesting there's something inappropriate about a former Army marksman retaining her abilities?" "Not at all, Commander Harrison." Thorne's smile grew colder. "I'm merely trying to understand how our base janitor suddenly became Annie Oakley in the middle of a firefight. Protocol requires a full investigation of any civilian involvement in combat situations." Brenna felt her hands tighten on the Barrett. "Sir, my transfer requests included full documentation of my military background and qualifications. I've been completely transparent about my capabilities. Have you?" Thorne's eyes locked onto hers with uncomfortable intensity. "Your record mentions a training accident, but the details are rather sparse. Perhaps you'd care to elaborate?" The question hit Brenna like a physical blow. The classified nature of that mission, the death of her spotter, the convenient gaps in the official report. All of it suddenly felt connected to the man standing before her. Kane must have sensed her tension because he shifted again, making his protective stance more obvious. "Colonel, Mitchell just saved this base from being overrun. Maybe the interrogation could wait until after the medical team checks her shoulder." "Of course," Thorne said smoothly, but his eyes never left Brenna. "We wouldn't want to aggravate any old injuries, though it seems they didn't hinder your performance today." The emphasis he placed on performance made it sound like an accusation. Brenna met his gaze steadily, fighting the urge to step back. "The shot needed to be made, sir. I made it." "Simple as that?" Thorne asked softly. "Just like old times?" The question hung in the air like smoke, heavy with implications. Brenna felt cold certainty settling in her gut. Thorne knew something about her last mission, about what had really happened to her spotter. His lack of surprise at her abilities wasn't just suspicious, it was damning. "Yes, sir," she replied, keeping her voice level. "Just like old times." Thorne held her gaze for a long moment before turning away. "Commander Harrison, I'll need your full report on my desk within the hour. Ms. Mitchell, report to my office at 0800 hours tomorrow for a formal statement." As Thorne walked away, his posture remained perfect, his authority unquestioned. But something had shifted in the air between them. The invisible janitor had become visible in a way that clearly made him uncomfortable. Kane waited until Thorne was out of earshot before turning to Brenna. "You okay?" Brenna carefully set the Barrett down, her movements precise to hide the trembling in her hands. "He knows something. About my last mission, about what really happened." "I got that feeling too," Kane said quietly. "And he's not happy you just showed everyone what you can do." Kane sat in the dimly lit Tactical Operations Center, his injured arm throbbing beneath fresh bandages as he scrolled through personnel files on the secure terminal. The clock on the wall showed 2:15 in the morning, but sleep was the furthest thing from his mind. Colonel Thorne's reaction to Brenna's marksmanship had set off too many alarm bells to ignore. He pulled up Brenna Mitchell's official service record, scanning through the basic information he already knew. Distinguished graduate of Advanced Individual Training, selected for Specialized Marksmanship Program, rapid advancement through the ranks, multiple commendations for excellence in field operations. Then came the gap. The official report listed a training accident at Fort Benning, Georgia. Equipment malfunctioned during a routine exercise. But something about the timeline didn't add up. Kane noticed a 3-week discrepancy between the date of the incident and when Brenna was admitted to the base hospital. He dug deeper, using his command clearance to access restricted files. A cross-reference of deployment records showed Brenna's unit had been conducting classified operations in Afghanistan during those missing 3 weeks. They weren't at Fort Benning at all. "What are you trying to hide?" Kane muttered, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he searched for more inconsistencies. The pieces started coming together as he found fragments of mission reports. Brenna's unit had been tasked with eliminating high-value targets along the Pakistan border. Her spotter, Staff Sergeant David Chen, was listed as killed in action, not during a training exercise, but during an active operation. Kane leaned back in his chair, running his good hand through his hair. The official story about equipment failure at Fort Benning was completely fabricated. But why create such an elaborate cover story? He pulled up Sergeant Chen's service record next. Like Brenna, his file showed an exemplary career cut tragically short. The report on his death cited catastrophic scope failure leading to compromised position and enemy fire. Everything wrapped up neat and clean. Too clean. Kane searched through after-action reports looking for witness statements or supporting documentation. He found nothing. The entire incident had been sanitized, reduced to bare minimum details that raised more questions than they answered. "Come on, give me something," he whispered, digging into cross-referenced mission logs. A small detail caught his eye. 2 days before the incident, Chen had filed a formal request to speak with the Inspector General's office. The request was denied due to operational tempo, but the timing seemed far from coincidental. Kane opened another window, searching for any communication records between Chen and his chain of command. Most were routine, but one encrypted message sent hours before his death stood out. It had been marked as corrupted and unrecoverable. "Convenient," Kane muttered. He checked the duty roster for the day of the incident. Colonel Thorne, then a major, had been the commanding officer for the operation. The same man who had spent months blocking Brenna's transfer requests was directly involved in the mission that ended her career. Kane's jaw tightened as he considered the implications. Brenna's relegated position as a janitor suddenly looked less like bad luck and more like deliberate containment. Keep her close, keep her quiet, keep her where you can watch her. The terminal chimed as Kane accessed the ballistics report from Chen's death. The document cited metal fatigue in the scope mounting system, claiming it had caused a catastrophic failure during target acquisition. But the serial numbers for the equipment didn't match standard issue gear. In fact, they didn't match any equipment logged in the Army's inventory system. "This whole thing stinks," Kane said to himself, printing key documents while continuing to search. He found more disturbing patterns. Every officer who had supported Brenna's transfer requests had been reassigned within weeks. Medical evaluations of her shoulder injury contained contradictory assessments. Even her original marksmanship qualification scores had been altered, downgraded in later versions of her file. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made Kane quickly close the files and clear the terminal's history. A night duty officer passed by, nodding respectfully before continuing his rounds. Kane gathered the printed documents, sliding them into a manila folder. The evidence was circumstantial, but it painted a disturbing picture. Brenna's spotter had discovered something important enough to get himself killed. The entire incident had been covered up, blamed on faulty equipment that didn't exist. And Brenna, whether she realized it or not, had been effectively silenced by her discharge and reassignment. Today's display of her abilities had forced her back into the spotlight. No wonder Thorne had seemed so unsettled. The colonel's carefully maintained narrative was beginning to unravel. Kane tucked the folder into his jacket, wincing as the movement pulled at his injured arm. The truth about what happened to Brenna and her spotter was buried in those missing 3 weeks, in whatever Chen had discovered and tried to report. Somewhere in the redacted mission logs and corrupted messages lay answers that powerful people wanted to keep hidden. He stood up, his determination growing with each piece of the puzzle. Brenna wasn't just some washed-up soldier relegated to mopping floors. She was a loose end that Thorne and others had tried to contain. But they hadn't counted on her extraordinary shot today, or on having someone finally notice the inconsistencies in their carefully constructed cover story. Brenna sat cross-legged on her narrow bunk, surrounded by papers Kane had brought her. Her hands trembled as she read through the documents, each page revealing another piece of the puzzle she'd been too blind or too broken to see before. The scope they claimed failed? She looked up at Kane, who leaned against her small desk. It doesn't even exist in the system. Kane nodded, his blue eyes intense. The serial numbers are fake. The whole equipment failure story was fabricated to cover up what really happened that day. Brenna's mind raced back to that mission, the crystal-clear morning in the mountains. David Chen, her spotter, had been acting strange the day before, distracted, almost nervous. Now she knew why. He'd tried to report something to the Inspector General. They killed him, she whispered, the truth hitting her like a physical blow. They killed David and used me to sell their cover story. Her fingers clenched around the papers. And I believed them. I let them convince me it was my fault. You didn't have any reason to suspect otherwise, Kane said gently. They orchestrated everything perfectly. The medical reports, the psychological evaluations, the transfer denials. It was all designed to keep you exactly where they wanted you. Brenna stood up suddenly, needing to move. The small room felt suffocating as years of manipulation came into focus. Every time I requested a transfer, Thorne blocked it, said I wasn't ready, wasn't stable enough. She let out a bitter laugh. He wasn't protecting me. He was containing me. You were the only other witness to whatever Chen discovered, Kane confirmed. Keeping you close, in a lowly position, let them monitor you while reinforcing the narrative that you were damaged goods. Brenna paced the narrow space between her bunk and the wall. I played right into their hands. I was so convinced I was broken, I accepted everything they told me. She stopped, turning to face Kane. Do you know what Chen was trying to report? Kane shook his head. His message to the Inspector General was corrupted, conveniently. But Thorne was the commanding officer for your mission. Whatever Chen discovered, Thorne was involved. That's why he wasn't surprised by my shot today, Brenna said, the pieces clicking into place. He knew exactly what I was capable of. He's always known. She picked up another document, this one showing her altered marksmanship scores. They systematically erased my capabilities from the record, made it look like I was never more than mediocre. The realization made her stomach turn. How many people were involved in this? Hard to say, Kane replied. But someone with significant authority had to approve all these changes. This goes beyond just Thorne. Brenna sank back onto her bunk, overwhelmed by the scope of the deception. I've spent 2 years believing I failed, that I got my spotter killed because I wasn't good enough. Her voice cracked. They used my guilt to control me. Kane moved to sit beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. They underestimated you. They thought they could keep you down indefinitely, but today proved them wrong. David tried to expose something, Brenna said, her determination growing. Something big enough that they were willing to kill him and destroy my career to cover it up. She looked at Kane. I need to know what it was. We'll figure it out, Kane promised. But we need to be careful. These people have already proven they'll go to extreme lengths to protect their secrets. Brenna nodded, gathering the scattered papers. Each document represented another layer of betrayal, another piece of her life that had been manipulated. The weight of it was staggering, but beneath the shock and anger, something else was emerging, purpose. They didn't just take my career, she said quietly. They took my trust in myself, made me believe I was broken. She straightened her shoulders, feeling stronger than she had in years. I'm not broken. I never was. Kane watched her with quiet approval. No, you weren't. You were just a threat they needed to neutralize. Well, they failed, Brenna said, her voice firm, because now I know the truth, and I'm done being their convenient victim. She looked down at the papers in her hands, proof of the elaborate web of lies that had trapped her for so long. Her imposed limitations hadn't come from her injured shoulder or psychological trauma. They had come from calculated manipulation by people who feared what she might remember or discover. The realization was both infuriating and liberating. She wasn't a failure who had gotten her friend killed. She was a witness they had needed to silence. Everything, from the denied transfers to the menial job assignment, had been orchestrated to keep her contained and compliant. But today's shot had changed everything. She'd proven her capabilities in front of dozens of witnesses. The carefully constructed narrative of her incompetence had crumbled in a single moment of excellence. No wonder Thorne had reacted so strongly. His insurance policy against her recovering her confidence had just backfired spectacularly. Kane spread additional documents across Brenna's small desk, his expression grim. "I found something else. Something that explains everything." He pulled out a thick folder, its edges worn. "These are shipping manifests from your original mission, the ones that weren't supposed to exist." Brenna leaned forward, studying the papers. Lists of weapons, ammunition, and equipment scrolled down each page. But the destinations made her blood run cold. Names of known Afghan warlords, people they were supposed to be fighting, not supplying. "I don't understand," she said, though a terrible suspicion was forming in her mind. "Thorne's been running an arms-dealing operation," Kane explained, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Using his position to divert military supplies to warlords who pay him millions under the table. That mission you were on? It wasn't a standard reconnaissance operation." Brenna's hands started shaking as memories flooded back. "We were positioned to observe a valley pass. David kept saying something felt wrong about the intel." She closed her eyes, forcing herself to face the memories she'd buried. The day before it happened, he was agitated, said he needed to make a call. "He did make that call," Kane confirmed, pulling out another document. "To the Inspector General's office. He'd figured out what Thorne was doing. These supply routes you were watching? They weren't for tracking enemy movements, they were Thorne's delivery routes." The truth hit Brenna like a physical blow. David discovered the arms dealing. Her voice cracked. "That's why they killed him." Kane nodded solemnly. Thorne couldn't risk being exposed, but he needed to make it look like an accident, something that would eliminate the threat while maintaining his cover. He met Brenna's eyes. "He had your equipment sabotaged, not just to kill Chen, but to destroy you professionally and psychologically." Brenna stood up abruptly, needing to move as the full scope of Thorne's betrayal became clear. "He made me think I got my best friend killed. Let me believe for 2 years that my failure caused David's death." The rage building inside her was almost overwhelming. "And then he kept me here, mopping his floors, watching me struggle with guilt he created." "Keeping you close served 2 purposes," Kane explained. "He could monitor you, make sure you never remembered enough to piece things together. And your presence here, broken and reduced to menial labor, reinforced the narrative that you were psychologically unfit. No one would believe anything you might remember or claim." Brenna picked up one of the shipping manifests, her hands trembling with fury. "All those times he denied my transfer requests, claiming he was looking out for my well-being." She let out a bitter laugh. He was protecting himself, making sure his loose end stayed tied up. "The psychological evaluations, the medical reports about your shoulder, the altered performance records, it was all carefully orchestrated," Kane said. "He created a paper trail that made you look unstable and incompetent. Anyone looking into your claims would dismiss them as delusions of a traumatized soldier." Brenna sank back into her chair as the magnitude of the manipulation became clear. "He used my guilt and trauma against me, made me doubt everything about myself." She looked at Kane. "How many millions has he made selling weapons to our enemies?" "Based on these records, tens of millions at least." Kane's jaw tightened. "And every time those weapons are used against our forces, more soldiers die. Your friend Chen was trying to stop that." "David died trying to expose the truth," Brenna said quietly. "And I've spent 2 years believing I failed him." She stood up again, her posture straightening as years of self-doubt fell away. "Thorne didn't just betray me, he betrayed everything we stand for." "The accident was staged perfectly," Kane continued, pulling out more documents. "The sabotaged equipment, the corrupted communication records, the conveniently missing witnesses. He made sure there was nothing left to contradict his version of events. "Except me," Brenna said, a new understanding dawning. "He couldn't kill me without raising suspicions, so he destroyed me instead, made me doubt my own abilities so completely that I became exactly what he needed, a broken soldier who would never be a threat." "Until today," Kane added, "when you proved in front of everyone that you're far from broken. No wonder he was so rattled by that shot. His carefully constructed facade started crumbling the moment you pulled that trigger." Brenna gathered the documents, each page representing another layer of Thorne's treachery. The arms-dealing operation, the murdered spotter, the elaborate cover-up, and her own systematic destruction. It was a conspiracy of staggering proportions, but understanding the truth, finally knowing why everything had happened, filled her with a clarity she hadn't felt in years. "David died trying to expose this," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion churning inside her. "Thorne made me believe I failed him that day, but the real failure would be letting them get away with this now that we know the truth." Over the next few days, Brenna and Kane developed a careful system for gathering evidence. During her cleaning rounds, Brenna accessed areas of the base that others rarely noticed. Her janitorial cart became the perfect cover for transporting documents and collecting information without arousing suspicion. "The supply manifests always come through on Thursdays," Brenna explained, pushing her cart past Kane in a seemingly casual encounter. "Thorne keeps the originals in his office before doctoring the copies that go to command." Kane nodded slightly, maintaining the appearance of a routine conversation with base personnel. "We need both versions to prove the discrepancies, but his office is locked down tight." "Not to me," Brenna said quietly, adjusting her mop. "I clean it every night. He thinks I'm too broken to be a threat. That's our advantage." They met later that evening in a secluded maintenance shed, where Kane had set up a makeshift command center for their investigation. Maps and documents covered a worn workbench, each piece adding to the puzzle of Thorne's operation. "The weapons are moved in small batches," Kane explained, tracing routes on a terrain map, "mixed in with legitimate supply runs. That's why it went undetected for so long." He glanced at Brenna. "Until David figured it out." Brenna studied the map, her military training resurfacing as she analyzed the patterns. "These routes all converge here," she pointed to a valley. "The same valley where—" She paused, swallowing hard. Kane placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to do this part." "Yes, I do." Brenna straightened, drawing strength from his support. "David died trying to expose this. I need to understand exactly what happened that day." Working together, they reconstructed the events leading to the fatal mission. Kane's SEAL training and Brenna's intimate knowledge of the operation helped them piece together Thorne's methodology. Each discovery brought them closer to the truth, and to each other. "The hardest part was believing I was responsible," Brenna admitted one evening as they reviewed communication logs. "Thinking I had failed not just the mission, but my best friend." Kane set down the documents he was holding. "Thorne used that guilt to control you, but you never failed anyone, Brenna. You were another victim of his betrayal." Their eyes met in the dim light of the shed. The understanding between them had grown deeper than just investigation partners. Kane saw past the broken facade Thorne had created, recognizing the warrior spirit that had never truly been extinguished. They worked methodically, gathering financial records, supply manifests, and communication logs. Brenna's access to the base's maintenance areas proved invaluable. She discovered a hidden cache of documents in an unused storage room, proving Thorne's connections to local warlords. "He's getting sloppy," Kane observed as they photographed the evidence. "The successful operation made him overconfident." "And my shot during the attack rattled him," Brenna added. "He's worried his control is slipping." They developed a careful routine to avoid detection. Quick exchanges in hallways, coded messages left in maintenance requests, and brief meetings in obscure corners of the base. Each piece of evidence was meticulously documented and secured in multiple locations. "If anything happens to either of us," Kane insisted, The evidence has to reach the Inspector General's office. We can't let him bury the truth again. The investigation brought them closer together, their shared mission creating a bond of trust and understanding. Kane helped Brenna process the emotions that surfaced as they uncovered more details about David's death. "I keep thinking about all the times I doubted myself," Brenna confessed during a late-night review session. "How I let him convince me I was worthless." Kane turned to face her fully. "You survived what was meant to destroy you. That's not weakness, Brenna. That's incredible strength." Their growing connection went beyond the investigation. Kane's unwavering belief in her abilities helped Brenna reclaim pieces of herself that Thorne had tried to destroy. In turn, her resilience and determination inspired Kane's own sense of justice. They carefully built their case, knowing they would only get one chance to expose Thorne's operation. Each document was verified, each connection confirmed, creating an ironclad chain of evidence that couldn't be dismissed or covered up. "We're almost ready," Kane said one evening, reviewing their accumulated evidence. "We just need the final piece, proof of his direct involvement in David's death." Brenna nodded, her expression determined. "Those records will be in his personal safe, the one he thinks only he can access." She met Kane's concerned gaze. "I can get to it. He never changed the maintenance override codes. He never thought he needed to." The weight of their undertaking hung heavy in the air between them. They both knew the risks, understood the consequences of failure. But in that moment, their shared purpose was stronger than their fears. "Whatever happens," Kane said softly, "we finish what David started. We expose the truth." Brenna reached out and squeezed his hand, drawing strength from their connection. "Together," she agreed, her voice steady with newfound confidence. They had transformed from unlikely allies into partners united by a common cause. Their careful preparation and growing bond had created something Thorne never anticipated, a force strong enough to bring down his carefully constructed world of corruption and betrayal. The first warning came as a shadow passing too quickly across Thorne's office window. Brenna froze, her hand still on the safe's maintenance panel. Through the glass, she caught glimpses of armed figures moving with practiced precision across the compound. Her radio crackled. "Get out now." Kane's urgent whisper confirmed her worst fears. "Thorne knows. He's activated his people." Brenna's fingers flew over the keypad, securing the evidence they'd gathered. Her heart pounded as she slipped the documents into her jacket. The sound of boots in the hallway sent her diving behind Thorne's desk just as the door burst open. 2 soldiers swept in, their movements revealing their special operations training. They weren't regular base security. These were Thorne's personal operatives. Brenna held her breath as their flashlight beams cut through the darkness. "Clear," one called out. But she was here. The safe's been accessed. A familiar voice responded from the hallway. "Find her." Colonel Thorne's command carried none of his usual false warmth. "Harrison, too. No witnesses." Brenna waited until the footsteps faded before slipping to the door. The hallway stretched empty in both directions, but she could hear movement on multiple floors. They were coordinating a systematic sweep of the building. Her radio clicked twice. Kane's signal. She responded with 3 clicks. "Danger, can't talk." Years of cleaning every inch of this base had given her intimate knowledge of its layout. She knew routes the others had never noticed. Moving silently, Brenna made her way to a maintenance closet. Behind the shelving unit, a service hatch led to the base's underground tunnel system. As she pulled it open, footsteps thundered above her. They were sealing off the building level by level. The tunnels stretched in a complex network beneath the base, carrying power lines and communication cables. Brenna moved quickly through the narrow spaces, using only the dim emergency lighting to guide her. She needed to reach the rendezvous point where Kane would be waiting. A burst of gunfire echoed through the concrete passages, followed by shouting. Brenna pressed herself against a wall as voices approached. "He's heading for the South Junction," someone called. "Cut him off at Section 4. Kane was alive, but being pursued. Brenna calculated quickly. She knew a maintenance shaft that would put her ahead of the search parties. Moving as fast as she dared in the low light, she navigated the maze of tunnels. The sound of fighting reached her first. Kane had been cornered by 2 of Thorne's men near a power junction. Despite his combat skills, he was outnumbered and defending against opponents who knew his tactics. Brenna didn't hesitate. She grabbed a length of pipe from a nearby repair rack and swung it hard into the back of the nearest attacker's knee. The man went down with a cry of pain. Kane immediately capitalized on the distraction, dispatching the second opponent with a precise strike. "They've got the whole base locked down," Kane reported, quickly checking the fallen men for weapons. "Thorne's convinced everyone we're foreign agents trying to compromise base security." "How many of his people?" Brenna asked, accepting the pistol Kane handed her. "At least a dozen that I've confirmed, maybe more." Kane's expression was grim. He's been building this network for years. They moved deeper into the tunnel system, using Brenna's knowledge to stay ahead of their pursuers. The sounds of the search parties echoed confusingly through the concrete passages. "We need to get the evidence out," Brenna said as they paused at an intersection. "Even if they catch us, the truth has to reach command." Kane nodded, pulling out his satellite phone. "I can get a message to my team, but we'll need to reach the surface." He looked at her. "The maintenance shaft near the old generator room. Can we get there?" "Yes, but they'll be watching the obvious exits." Brenna's mind raced through possibilities. "There's a ventilation shaft that connects to the surface. It's tight, but we can make it." A burst of gunfire cut off further discussion. Flashlight beams swept the tunnel behind them as Thorne's voice echoed off the walls. "Mitchell, Harrison, you're only making this worse for yourselves. Surrender now and we can discuss terms." They retreated deeper into the tunnels, moving as quietly as possible. The pursuit was closing in from multiple directions, herding them toward the older sections of the base. "He's trying to trap us in the abandoned sectors," Kane whispered as they navigated through a partially collapsed passage. "Fewer exits." Brenna led them through a series of maintenance crawl spaces, using routes she'd discovered during years of repair work. The sounds of their pursuers grew more distant, but the danger remained intense. One wrong turn, one moment of hesitation, and Thorne's people would have them. They reached a junction where 3 tunnels converged. Suddenly, flashlights blazed from 2 directions. They'd been flanked. "Down!" Kane shouted, pushing Brenna toward a service duct as bullets sparked off the concrete around them. They scrambled through the narrow opening as their attackers converged on their position. The chase had only begun and Thorne's net was tightening. But in the darkness of those tunnels, Brenna felt a fierce determination replace her fear. She knew these passages better than anyone, and this time, she wouldn't let Thorne destroy another life. The tunnel's emergency lights cast eerie shadows as Brenna and Kane pressed forward through the narrow passages. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, and the hum of distant generators vibrated through the concrete walls. Every sound could mean danger. 3 levels down, Brenna whispered, leading Kane through a maintenance shaft she'd repaired countless times. The old communication bunker should be empty. Kane checked the ammunition in his borrowed pistol. "They're pushing us deeper underground. Thorne's trying to limit our options." A burst of radio chatter echoed through the tunnels. Brenna recognized the tactical formations being called out. They were establishing a search grid. She pulled Kane into a service alcove as flashlight beams swept past their position. "This way," she breathed, waiting until the patrol passed. Her fingers found a loose panel in the wall, one she'd never quite gotten around to fixing. Behind it lay a narrow crawl space between utility lines. They squeezed through the tight space, moving as quietly as possible. Years of maintaining these tunnels had taught Brenna every shortcut and hidden passage. She'd mapped them in her mind during long shifts, never imagining they'd become escape routes. Boots thundered overhead as another team moved into position. Kane touched her arm, signaling a halt. They could hear Thorne's voice through the ceiling grate. "They'll head for the north exit. Teams 3 and 4, seal it off. Drive them toward the armory sector." Brenna's heart raced. The armory was a dead end, heavily secured with only one way in or out. "He's trying to trap us," she whispered. "We need to change levels," Kane replied. "Find a different route up." A sudden explosion rocked the tunnels. Emergency klaxons began blaring as smoke filled the passage ahead. Through the chaos, they heard Thorne's orders. "They're using diversions. All teams converge on Sector 7. Brenna pulled Kane toward a utility shaft. "This connects to the lower maintenance level. We can..." Gunfire erupted from behind them. Two of Thorne's men had spotted them through the smoke. Kane returned fire, covering their retreat as they scrambled down the ladder. The lower level was darker, lit only by red emergency lights. They ran through the maze of passages, their footsteps echoing off concrete walls. More shots rang out. Another team had cut off their path ahead. "Left," Brenna called, yanking open a heavy door. They ducked through just as bullets sparked off the metal frame. The passage narrowed, forcing them to run single file. Brenna's knowledge of the layout was their only advantage now. She led them through a series of sharp turns, trying to lose their pursuers in the complex network of tunnels. But Thorne's people were well trained. No matter which route they took, sounds of pursuit remained close behind. More teams were moving to cut off escape routes ahead. They emerged into a wider corridor. Kane grabbed Brenna's arm, pulling her back as flashlight beams swept across the intersection ahead. They were being surrounded. "The ventilation shaft," Brenna gasped, pointing to an access panel. "It connects to—" An explosion above them showered debris from the ceiling. The shockwave knocked them both off their feet. Through the ringing in her ears, Brenna heard Thorne's voice over multiple radios. "All teams, they're cornered. Push them toward the armory. No escape routes." Kane helped her up as boots thundered from multiple directions. "They're using shaped charges to collapse alternate routes," he said grimly, "hurting us exactly where they want us." They had no choice but to move deeper into the base. Every side passage they tried was either blocked or guarded. Thorne's men had planned this carefully, using their knowledge of standard tactical responses. The armory entrance loomed ahead, a heavy blast door set into reinforced concrete. It was designed to withstand attacks, but now it felt like a trap closing around them. "Inside!" Kane shouted as another explosion rocked the tunnel behind them. They sprinted through the armory entrance as chunks of ceiling crashed down, partially blocking the doorway. The armory was a large chamber filled with weapons racks and ammunition storage. Heavy steel shutters covered the walls and security cameras monitored every corner. They were trapped. "The ventilation system," Brenna said, moving toward an air duct. "If we can reach—" "Don't bother." Thorne's voice came through the intercom system. "All external vents are sealed. You've got nowhere left to run." Kane took up a defensive position behind a weapons rack as footsteps approached through the partially blocked doorway. "How many rounds do you have left?" Brenna checked her pistol. "Half a magazine." She moved to cover the other side of the entrance, her mind racing through options. Everything in the armory was securely locked down. The weapons and ammunition they could use were tantalizingly out of reach behind heavy steel doors. Through the gap in the debris, they could see flashlights approaching. Thorne's teams were moving carefully now, knowing they had their quarry cornered. The colonel's voice echoed through the tunnels. "Secure the entrance. No one gets out until I arrive." Brenna met Kane's eyes in the dim emergency lighting. They were trapped in the armory, exactly where Thorne had planned to drive them. Now they could only wait as their pursuers closed in for the final confrontation. Colonel Thorne stepped through the debris-strewn entrance of the armory, flanked by 4 armed soldiers. His polished boots crunched over broken concrete as he surveyed the scene with cold satisfaction. Kane and Brenna stood backed against the weapons lockers, their pistols trained on the entrance but effectively useless against the overwhelming force. "I must admit you've led us on quite a chase," Thorne said, his voice echoing in the reinforced chamber. "But this ends exactly as I planned." He gestured to his men, who spread out to cover all angles. "Drop your weapons," he ordered. "Now." Kane and Brenna exchanged glances before slowly placing their pistols on the ground. 2 soldiers immediately moved forward to kick the weapons away. "You know, Brenna," Thorne continued, pacing with calculated steps, "keeping you as a janitor was really quite brilliant. Who would suspect the broken little cleaner of being a threat?" His smile was razor-sharp. "Your psychological evaluation after the training accident made it so easy. All those doubts about your abilities, the trauma of losing your spotter. It was the perfect cover." Brenna's hands clenched into fists. "You killed him. You killed James because he discovered your arms dealing—" "He was careless," Thorne replied dismissively. Started asking too many questions about supply manifests and missing weapons, but you were more valuable alive, damaged, controlled. He turned to Kane. Until you had to interfere. 2 soldiers grabbed Kane, forcing him to his knees. Another pressed a gun to the back of his head. The Taliban have been quite active lately, Thorne mused. It would be tragic, but unsurprising if they managed to infiltrate the base and target our elite personnel. A SEAL commander and a former marksman, both killed while heroically defending the armory. Brenna's mind raced as she watched Kane struggling against his captors. The impossible shot from earlier flashed through her memory. The perfect calculation of wind, elevation, and movement. Her hands had been steady, her aim true. The psychological barriers that had haunted her for years suddenly felt paper-thin. "You're wrong about me being broken," she said, her voice growing stronger. "That shot today proved it. You didn't destroy my skills. You just made me believe you had." Thorne laughed. "And what good does that revelation do you now? You're unarmed and outnumbered. Your moment of glory changes nothing." But Brenna's eyes had caught something he couldn't see. The angle of the steel support beam above them, the precise geometry of the room she'd cleaned 1,000 times. She remembered Kane's words about the ricochet technique he'd developed, the exact calculations needed to make an impossible shot possible. "You never understood what makes a true marksman," she said, subtly shifting her position. "It's not about the weapon, it's about seeing the angles others miss." In one fluid motion, she grabbed a loose piece of rebar from the debris and threw it with precision. The metal rod struck the angled beam above Thorne's head, ricocheting at exactly the right angle to strike his hand. His pistol went flying as he howled in pain. The moment of surprise was all Kane needed. He drove his elbow back into one soldier's stomach, then twisted to disarm the man holding the gun to his head. Brenna was already moving, diving for her discarded pistol as chaos erupted in the armory. Thorne scrambled for his weapon, but Brenna was faster. She came up in a shooter's stance, her aim rock steady as she targeted his reaching hand. The shot echoed through the chamber, and Thorne recoiled as the bullet struck precisely where she'd aimed, disabling without killing. "Stand down," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority she'd buried for so long. Kane had already subdued 2 of the soldiers, and the others, seeing their commander wounded and their plan unraveling, lowered their weapons. "Impossible," Thorne gasped, clutching his injured hand. "You were broken. Weak." "No," Brenna replied, keeping her aim steady. "I was just waiting for the right moment to take my shot." She saw the truth in his eyes. He'd never really broken her. He'd only made her doubt herself, and that doubt had finally shattered like glass. Kane quickly secured the remaining soldiers while keeping his weapon trained on Thorne. "Base security will be here soon," he said. "The real security, not your compromised men. It's over, Colonel." Brenna stood over Thorne, her aim never wavering. The psychological barriers that had haunted her for years had crumbled in the face of truth. She wasn't the broken soldier he'd tried to create. She was a marksman, one of the best, and she'd finally reclaimed that identity. "You were wrong about one more thing," she told Thorne as approaching footsteps echoed through the tunnels. "A true warrior doesn't need to be visible to be strong. Sometimes being overlooked is the perfect position for taking the shot that matters most." The base erupted into organized chaos as military police and investigators swarmed the armory. Brenna watched as Thorne and his conspirators were led away in handcuffs, their polished uniforms now stained with dust from the tunnel chase. She stood straight-backed beside Kane, her posture reflecting the weight lifting from her shoulders. Senior investigators from the Criminal Investigation Division arrived within hours, their serious faces softening as Brenna and Kane presented the evidence they'd gathered. Document after document revealed Thorne's intricate web of arms dealing and corruption. Most damning were the records proving his deliberate sabotage of her original mission and the calculated murder of her spotter. "Staff Sergeant Mitchell," the lead investigator said, his voice carrying through the command center's briefing room. "These findings completely exonerate you. The evidence shows clear manipulation of mission parameters and deliberate equipment tampering that led to the death of Sergeant James Cooper." Brenna's throat tightened at the mention of her former spotter's name. Kane's steady presence beside her gave her strength as the investigator continued. Furthermore, we've uncovered systematic efforts by Colonel Thorne to suppress your career advancement and maintain psychological control through falsified evaluations and blocked transfer requests. The base commander, Brigadier General Phillips, stepped forward. His weathered face showed a mix of anger and regret. Staff Sergeant Mitchell, on behalf of the United States Army, I offer our deepest apologies for this grave injustice. Effective immediately, you are reinstated to active duty with a promotion to Sergeant First Class. Brenna's eyes stung as the general pinned the new rank insignia to her collar. She thought of all the nights spent cleaning floors while fighting back tears, all the moments of doubt and self-recrimination. Now, standing tall in her dress uniform, she felt those shadows finally retreat. Your extraordinary actions during the Taliban assault, combined with your instrumental role in exposing this conspiracy, demonstrate the highest qualities of an Army soldier, the general continued. We would be honored to have you return to your role as a senior marksman instructor. Thank you, sir, Brenna replied, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overflow. I accept. After the formal proceedings concluded, Brenna found herself walking the base perimeter with Kane. The setting sun painted the mountains in shades of purple and gold, a stark contrast to the underground tunnels where they'd faced death hours earlier. You know, Kane said, his blue eyes warm as he looked at her. I've commanded some of the best soldiers in the world, but watching you reclaim your identity, overcome years of manipulation, that's been truly extraordinary. Brenna smiled, remembering how he'd been the first to truly see her. You believed in me before I could believe in myself again. When you handed me that rifle during the attack, you weren't just trusting me with a weapon. You were giving me back my purpose. Kane stopped walking, turning to face her. I recognized a warrior spirit in you the first time we met. Even when you were pushing that mop, you carried yourself with a dignity that caught my attention. I just didn't realize then that I was also meeting the woman I'd fall in love with. Her heart swelled at his words. Their relationship had evolved so naturally from mutual respect to deeper understanding, and finally to love. He'd never tried to rescue her. He'd simply stood beside her while she rescued herself. We make quite a team, she said softly, reaching for his hand. The SEAL commander and the marksman who refused to stay invisible. Speaking of teams, Kane replied with a grin, my unit could use a precision shooting instructor. The position comes with joint operations potential, advanced tactical training. And a certain handsome commander as my CO? Brenna finished, matching his smile. That's just a bonus. He pulled her closer, his expression growing serious. You fought your way back into the light, Brenna. Watching you transform from the shadow Thorne tried to trap you in. It's been amazing. Brenna thought about the journey that had brought her here. From the devastating loss of her spotter to years of forced invisibility, from the moment of truth during the Taliban attack to the final confrontation in the armory. Each step had led her not just back to her career, but to this man who understood both her warrior's heart and her gentle soul. I'm not in the shadows anymore, she said, lifting her face to the fading sunlight, and I never will be again. Kane's arms encircled her waist as he drew her into a kiss that spoke of shared battles and future victories. When they finally parted, Brenna saw her own joy reflected in his eyes. She had reclaimed more than just her career and reputation. She had found her true partner, someone who matched her strength and understood her scars. Together, they walked toward the base, their shadows stretching long behind them in the setting sun. Brenna's new rank insignia caught the light, a tangible symbol of her vindication. But it was the warmth of Kane's hand in hers that truly marked her transformation, from invisible to invincible, from broken to whole, from alone to deeply, completely loved. If this story made you pause, reflect, or even smile, don't forget to subscribe. I post daily, and the next story might be exactly what you need to hear.